Hello, and thanks for joining me. It's Lizanne, the seasoned spouse, and I'm here this week to talk about a very important topic, which is military spouse groups. Some units call this the Family Readiness Group, which is FRG. Some units have another term, but most military units have some type of group, club, organization, or outreach for their service member spouses and family members. And everyone seems to have a different opinion about these groups. Some people have had great experiences and they love them. Some people have had horrible, terrifying experiences and they never want to have anything to do with a spouse group again. So today we're going to talk about both sides of that spectrum, talk about what a spouse group can do for military spouses, and why I truly believe that you should get involved in a military spouse group, even if you have hesitation and have had bad experiences in the past. So I will start off by saying that my husband has been in a few different military units, and we've kind of seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of family readiness groups, or FRG organizations. So I'm not coming into this with rose-colored glasses and telling you that, oh, these units are wonderful and they're so perfect and you're going to have such a fun time, because that has not always been my experience. And I've been in units where there was almost no communication with families, which is never a good thing. And the families were basically dependent on their service member for information, which is not convenient during deployments or other times when the service member is away and unable to communicate. So that's the reason that these groups exist in the first place. And then we've also belonged to units where the family readiness group was very cliquish and was conformed with a handful of spouses that all seemed to know each other and get along really well and plan events that were fun for them and not necessarily interesting to anyone else in the unit. So I've seen some of the drama, I've seen the cliques, I've seen the personality conflicts that can happen in these FRG groups. And I know it's a problem, but I also do believe that family readiness groups can do something for all of us. So if you are watching, I want to take a quick poll and see where we're coming from. If you have been involved in an FRG unit group before, whether currently or in the past, and you've had a great experience with the military spouse group, then go ahead and give us some love, show a little heart, and I want to see some love for those family readiness groups. And on the other hand, if you have heard some horror stories and you have had experiences like the ones I mentioned with some cliques and some drama and some exclusivity of certain members, then go ahead and give me a thumbs up that you know what I'm talking about and that I'm not the only one who experienced some of that non-inclusiveness in the spouse groups. So I do. I see that, yeah, we have a mixture of experiences, and I know that in those family readiness groups, some people love them, some people hate them. And unfortunately, a lot of those groups get a really bad reputation, even among the service members. Before they're even married, before they're even dating, they hear negative things about the spouse groups, how it's just drama, it's just a clique, it's just a bunch of busybody ladies getting together and making everyone's life miserable. And so unfortunately, what we sometimes see is that new significant others who are dating a service member or new spouses who have just moved to marry their service member, they come to the base and they don't know much about military life, and they hear something about a spouse group or a family readiness group, and they ask their service member about it. The service member is going to give them a really bad report saying, oh, you don't want to have anything to do with that. That's just a bunch of annoying people that they're just going to make your life more filled with drama and difficult, and they're not going to help you at all. And so we see this, unfortunately, all the time, that the service members are the ones that have the worst opinion of the family group, and they're not even allowing their new spouse or their new significant other to discover it and to get involved. So if you are one of those people that first heard about family groups from your spouse and got a very bad report from the service member side, then go ahead and give a thumbs up for that experience, because I think a lot of us have been there before too. And what we want to talk about today is how we can move past some of those stereotypical experiences and what a spouse group actually is supposed to do and what they can do for us. Yeah, I thought I was not the only one who'd been through that. So we're going to talk about what the spouse group can do for you and why I believe that you really should get involved, even if you've heard some bad things and had some bad experiences in the past. So let's start off talking about what can the Family Readiness Group do? What is their purpose anyway? Why do we have these groups of supposedly boring, busybody old ladies who get together and cause drama? Why do they exist in the first place? Well, anyone who is even a little bit older than me and remembers what it was like to be in the military before September 11th, 2001, probably experienced a military without these family readiness groups. It used to be a very informal thing. There was no full-time position that was called the FRG leader or the FRO or the ombudsman. These were not paid positions. They didn't exist back then. And basically units relied on volunteers. They often relied on the CO's wife to make phone calls and pass along information or cordially invite people to come over and socialize. And that was fine before wartime. And then what happened was when September 11th and the preceding 15 years of war, we saw units up their deployment tempos. We saw units training much more often. And families who were around during those early years, which I was not a spouse at that time, I was a girlfriend, but spouses that I've talked to around that time will tell you that absolutely there was a lack of communication with the families. The military was not supporting families. Families were living on bases completely isolated and alone and not knowing what was going on and not having access to local resources. And so it took a couple years for the government to realize that, hey, we need to actually support the families of our deploying service members and do a little bit better for them. And that's why these positions and these groups were created in the first place. The Family Readiness Group, FRG, is intended to support the entire family while the service member is training and or deployed. So they are supposed to provide a variety of support, which includes local resources, which includes friendship and camaraderie. Sometimes it includes get-togethers, sometimes it includes classes, and it can even include things like meals for new moms, meals for families going through a medical emergency or a car accident, things like that. It's that type of community support that service member families need when they are living so far from their actual family members and when their service member is living so far from them. So the idea behind the Family Readiness Group is to give the families those resources and support and classes that they need to get through military life, which sounds like a great idea in practice or in theory. But I think we've all seen in practice, sometimes this can go downhill when it becomes filled with drama and cliques and unwanted personality conflicts. So if you have had a good or bad experience with an FRG group, I'd love to hear your reactions in the comments. Go ahead and share with us either a really great thing that a family readiness group has done for you. Maybe it was when you were new to a base or when your service member was recently deployed and you didn't have access to a resource. Share something wonderful that your FRG group has done for you. Or, on the other hand, if you've only ever had a negative experience with them, then tell us a little bit what happened. Were you excluded? Were you made to feel out of place at an event? Were your needs not met? Were people just downright rude to you? Tell us about that so that we can see what the problems are and what the available support is from the FRG groups, and we'll talk about how to work through some of those issues. So I'd love to see in the comments, let me know whether you've had a good experience or a bad experience, and we'll talk about those a little bit. So I told you what the FRG group can do for you, and I'll give you a few of personal examples just so you know where I'm coming from. We've moved several times during my husband's career, so I'm used to being, the new kid on the block, the new family on base, and usually some of our first friends come from his unit. It just makes sense. Now, if I only allowed him to be the only source of finding friends, then I'd only be able to make friends with people in his immediate group or in his office, and that's not very helpful. But when we go to unit events, in our branch, in his job description, a unit is 1,000 different families. So the odds of me meeting someone else that I have something in common with, another mom, are pretty good at those unit events, even if it's not someone that works directly in my husband's chain of command or in his shop or whatever. And that's great. It's wonderful to make friends that are in the same unit, but in a different job, that the husbands don't have anything to do with each other. And that way you can kind of connect and relate a little bit better. I can find that those are the best sources of information. When we get to a new base, I want to learn about, where do I find things? How do I get this done? Are there discounts and opportunities available here for my family? Because I have 4 kids. And if there's free resources available locally, I want to take advantage of them. So those unit events and classes have sometimes been a wonderful way for me to find my way around the base and kind of learn how things work here, because each base is a little bit different. Each unit is a little bit different. And there's definitely that learning curve as you're trying to find your way around, and you want someone to go through it with you. So connecting with other families in the unit has usually been a really helpful thing to do when we're new to a base. And honestly, those have been some of our first emergency contact phone numbers, because every military spouse knows what it's like when you get to a new place and you're trying to enroll your kids in school or in an activity or in anything, and you get to that part on the application that says 3 emergency contacts not related to you. And you're thinking, I don't know anyone in this state. Who am I going to put down as an emergency contact? But luckily, I remember that when we went to that unit function or that little welcoming event a few weeks ago, the kind lady that sat next to me, we exchanged phone numbers and we chit-chatted. And so I sent her a quick text like, hey, do you mind if I put you down as my emergency contact? And military spouses are always so understanding, and they've always said yes. So I've definitely used some emergency contacts that are not exactly the closest friends in the world, but it's usually people that I met through the unit, and they've been able to help me out. So I always make an effort when we go to those unit events to connect with at least one person. Maybe it's someone sitting at your table, maybe it's the one sitting next to you, maybe it's someone who's rolling their eyes at the speaker just as much as you are. That's okay. But I think it's important to get those phone numbers, get that name, so that you have someone you can talk to when situations come up. Because if you just know, hey, it was that nice lady wearing the blue shirt that sat next to me, that's really not going to help. But if you can look through your phone contacts and say, oh, here she is, maybe she'll know how I do this, and send her a text, give her a call. Hopefully they'll be able to help you out. So I'm going to read some of the comments here. Bailey said, my husband is National Guard, so the only experience with the FRG so far is family days around Christmas time. But now he is deploying, so I'm getting more involved. The communication hasn't been great so far, so I'm hoping it gets better, and they are an actual helpful resource. Bailey, I hear that a lot from the National Guard families, and I think that that is a really tough situation because you're so spread out. A lot of times you're not living near a base, so you don't have that collection of community and resources that a lot of the active duty service member families have. But I would still recommend staying in touch with them. Hopefully they will improve the communication, because especially when you're so far out, the only way you're going to hear from the unit or be connected to the unit at all or get any type of official information is through those emails from the FRG leader. That is the official link from the unit commander to the families. It's not appropriate for a family member to be emailing the commander and asking about training dates. That's what the FRG leader is supposed to be communicating. So they're going to be telling you deployment dates. They're going to be telling you about, classes and resources that come up during the deployment. Hopefully they'll be passing you some information about, there are resources available in National Guard families during deployments that you may not be familiar with if he hasn't deployed before. So hopefully they'll share with you some of those special deployment resources. And then certainly as you get toward the end of the deployment, there is a yellow ribbon program specific for National Guard families, and that helps with the reintegration process and the end of the deployment. Excuse me. So Bailey, I do hope that you'll stay in touch with them and that they'll continue to communicate with you, because for National Guard families in particular, that's the only connection that you have. And so I know that some of those unit events might be kind of far from you, but I hope that if you've made those personal connections at the events, that you can keep in touch with some of those family members online or through Facebook or Twitter or whatever you're using. Get those numbers in your phone, get somebody that you can text when you're having a bad day or just touch base with. Sometimes that can be a really great resource during deployment. So even if you only go to one meeting, all it needs is that face-to-face connection with one person, and then hopefully you'll have a friend through the deployment. So next up, Megan said, I've never been a part of an FRG, but I will be looking to join it as my husband is set to leave for training next year and possibly do a deployment as well. Megan, I think that's a really common experience. A lot of times it's hard for a unit to get community built and to get things going until a deployment comes along. And so sometimes I think the families and the spouses can be a little bit laid back and disinterested, because when the unit is just training here and there, maybe they're gone for a week, maybe they're gone for a few weeks, but there's nothing big happening. There's no deployment coming up. We don't have that pressure to build community. We all kind of do our own thing and coast along. And it's not until the threat of a deployment is hanging over everyone's head that we all suddenly realize that we need support, we need friends, we need help. And that's when we start seeing people coming out of the woodworks wanting to go to unit events and attend unit functions. So sometimes you have to do the best that you can. If you're involved in your FRG and you're one of those volunteers or you're a leader, you can't expect 100% participation when there's no big training events coming up. But as you get closer to a big training event or a deployment, you need to up the tempo of those events and try and draw in more people and be more inclusive, because people will be looking for that support. Christina said, my husband is guard and our FRG communication has been pretty bad. So I just work with local groups. Christina, I'm sorry to hear that. And then she has a follow-up further down. Families haven't been great either from our FRG leader. The follow-up on families hasn't been great. Okay. So Christina, I'm sorry that has been your experience. What kind of local groups are you in touch with? Are you connected to any local groups near a base, or do you have any access to a base, or are you talking about just like local civilian volunteer groups? Because that can be great too. I mean, just getting involved in your local community and your church and local mom groups that have nothing to do with the military, that's absolutely fine. And I encourage people to do that. But sometimes you do want that connection with people who get the military lifestyle, who understand what you're talking about when you talk about deployments and TDYs and things like that. MOPS, she said. So MOPS is a wonderful group that stands for Mothers of Preschoolers. And it's a nationwide group. It's actually overseas as well. I belonged to a MOPS group on a military base in Europe, which was pretty wonderful. And it's not necessarily a military thing. Although if you're in a MOPS group near a military base, you might connect with a lot of other military spouses and moms. But it's just a wonderful organization. It's a Christian organization through churches. And it's a collection of mothers of preschoolers that meet together usually weekly or a couple times a month to talk about different topics and encourage each other through preschooler life. And they usually have childcare on site. So it's just an hour or two of adult conversation on mothering topics while your little ones are playing in another room. And that can just be so refreshing and encouraging, especially during a deployment. Okay, so Bailey said that she did touch base with the Yellow Ribbon group before a deployment. So that's good. I think I missed a comment up here. Oh, Angela. As a former FRG leader for 2 different companies, please get involved. The leaders only want help. Not all FRGs are drama and not all are unhelpful. Absolutely, Angela. I agree with you. I know that, yes, there are those stereotypes and there are those bad experiences out there. But what I always tell people is try it at least once. And honestly, my personal motto is to try it at least twice. Because sometimes, even if you have that bad encounter or that bad experience the first time, I always give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe somebody was having a bad day. Maybe I was having a bad day. Maybe it was just an awkward event. You never know if that was a one-time thing. So give them a second chance to to make a good impression. Maybe you just ran into the wrong person, and the second time you'll run into the right people. So yeah, even though I've had some experiences where the groups were not entirely helpful, you know what? There's always something that we can do about that. I think a lot of people love to complain about their spouse groups and say that, they don't help me because of I'm in this situation and they're only helping people in that situation. Or, it's only for the moms because they always seem to meet during the day. Or it's only for people who work because they always seem to meet at night when my kids are in bed. And the FRG leader cannot make everyone happy. But what they can do is try to reach out and hold different events for everyone. So maybe you hold one event in the evening for your working people that's mostly for people that don't have kids. And then maybe you hold a separate event during the day for the people that have a bunch of little ones that aren't going to stay up late at night. You don't have to have the exact same people at both events. The purpose is that you're listening to your community, you're listening to your unit, and you're finding out what their needs are. And maybe the young mothers have very different needs from the young professionals. Not saying that young mothers can't be young professionals, just saying that they sometimes have different hours that they're available to be involved. But if you're meeting those different needs in different places, that's okay. And so I think we do ourselves a real disservice if we just go to one event and say, oh, it seemed to be all moms who were there, and I'm not a mom, so I just don't want to be involved in this group. I bet that there are a lot of other people who feel that way. And if you join as a volunteer and you tell them, hey, I'm a working professional, I can only meet on Saturdays or in evenings, then help them put together an event that will meet those needs, because I guarantee other people will feel just like you and that they will come out. So Brittany, hello, thanks for joining. So yeah, I always say give everyone a chance at least once. And if you see something that is lacking or seems to be wrong with your FRG leadership, then go ahead and get involved. Offer your services. Try to volunteer. I know some people accept volunteer help better and worse than others, but like Angela said, usually the leaders just want help. They don't want to be in charge. They just want more volunteers to help out and reach more people. And if you approach it the right way, saying, hey, I'm coming into this with these skills, or I'm available during these hours, what can I do for our families? I bet that they can find something that you can do that will help families. And then you'll feel more fulfilled. You'll connect with other families, and it will serve those families too. All right, we also have comments from Deb, retired spouse here. Hi, Deb. Have been involved in several groups in the 32 years of active duty. I have met and made lifelong friends through them. However, I've also seen some that are incredibly toxic. Be the change maker. Exactly. Thank you, Deb. That is incredible. 32 years of active duty. We're about halfway there. I don't think we would make it all the way to 32, but that's exactly right. There's good and there's bad groups out there. And instead of just writing them off on your first bad experience, I think it's so important and so valuable for spouses to take a step back and say, okay, this group does not seem to be meeting my needs right now. What changes can I suggest? What can I offer to help them meet my needs? For example, I'm a mom with 4 kids. And so when I'm helping to plan unit events, by default, just by nature, my inclination is to do it during the day, maybe when my kids are at school. That's when I have free time. That's when I'm available. And I have to kind of take an extra step to remind myself that there's people who aren't available during the day, and to kind of double check myself and remember to plan things in the evenings or plan things on the weekends. So if I have another spouse who does not have kids and is sitting there right next to me comparing notes and saying, hey, that's not going to work for me, or I know a lot of my friends are doing this at that time, then it's great to have that feedback. And I'm not going to say, oh, we have to do things this way because I have children. It's wonderful to get feedback from a variety of people and say, what works for you? What works for you? How can we meet your needs? And the more that the group is involved, the more people that you can reach out and touch. So that's what I think the groups are all about. Let me get to Tina's comment too. My husband is a Marine. We have FROs. I understand that. So FRO is the Family Readiness Officer. FRG is an Army and Air Force term, but it's just, I'm using that one because it's more widespread. The FROs are being phased out. I know. I wish our smaller branch had more support for spouses and families. With that being said, I have found the Family Readiness Program to be an asset. I couldn't imagine going through deployment without battle buddies. or a tribe to get through those rough times. Let's be honest, there's always at least one. Tina, I know, I hear you. I'm not sure if other branches are experiencing these budget cuts as well. I imagine at some point they all will be. But yes, in the Marine Corps, the FRO, Family Readiness Officer, paid position is being phased out. They're going through a lot of adjustments. So they are cutting back, and some units are losing their FRO. Some units are offering less money for their FROs. There's this whole reorganization happening right now, and there's a lot of question marks for a lot of people, and a lot of units aren't sure what is available in the future. And that's why I'm saying that it's so important to be involved and to be having your voice heard now, because we don't know what the government is going to pay for these family activities and for these family support systems next year. They might cut funding entirely. We never know. And so if we're not using the resources that are there, I think a lot of military families are familiar with that use it or lose it scenario. If we don't use the resources that are provided, then they go away. So it's really important that when our unit is offering family readiness activities, whether that is a casual get-together or a potluck event or a free class, it's important to give it a try and to take advantage of those activities while they're offered, because they may not be available next year. So I got a little bit sidetracked looking at all the comments, but thank you for sharing your positive and your negative experiences. And I think that a lot of people recognize the importance of giving a unit a second chance. And even if you've had a bad experience in the past, remember that every unit is going to be a new experience. Every base is going to do things differently. So it is really important to give things a second chance, especially when you're new to a unit or new to a base. So we've talked about a lot about what the units can do for you, what the family readiness groups can do for you. And I want to talk just before we close about why you should get involved in your spouse group. So even if you've had a bad experience or you've heard bad things about it before, I think you need to know that when a service member checks into a new unit, part of their check-in process, they are asked if they're married. And if they're married, the FRG leader is one of their check-in sheet people. And the FRG leader will ask them, do you want to give us your spouse's contact info to add them to an email list or add them to a Facebook group or put them on a phone tree, however different units are doing it. And unfortunately, it's up to the service member to opt you in to that FRG communication. Sometimes the spouses can on their own contact the FRG leader and say, hey, I'm Mrs. So-and-so. I'd like to be added to the email list. But usually it needs the service member's approval, just because it's military life and that's how things are. And that's the joy of being a dependent. So it's important that when you go to a new unit, you need to be a little bit proactive in telling your spouse, I want to be involved. I want to be connected. I want to at least hear from these people. I can always opt out of their email list later, but I need the service member to opt me in so that I know what's happening in the first place. So make sure you share that with either your significant other or your spouse, because a lot of units now are also including girlfriends and including boyfriends and significant others in communication if they wish to be included, because I think they're starting to recognize that going through a deployment is tough, whether you're the spouse or with the fiance or the girlfriend or the boyfriend. A deployment is hard, and it's good to have resources. Units are becoming much less exclusive of significant others than they were when I was a girlfriend and I was not even aware of family readiness activities. So it's really important to get involved in those groups and to let your service member know that you want to opt in to the email list or the Facebook group or whatever it is. If you feel like the unit is not providing enough activities or that there are activities that don't work for your hours, then speak up and improve them. Okay, the possibilities are endless for what you can do, and a lot of units can do free activities or organize things basically as a spouse group. So you can put together a potluck event anytime. Spouses are wonderful at potlucks, and now there's websites like perfectpotluck.com that will let you coordinate that pretty easily. So a potluck event is really easy. It's a great way to get people together. And then spouses can plan their own informal activities, whether it's like a game night at someone's house or a local trip to experience, a local activity of interest, whether you go out to a restaurant, anything that the spouses can imagine, they can put together. So don't say that there's not enough activities if you're not suggesting some of your own. If you feel like there is too much drama and too much toxicity in the group, I understand that, and that's a really sensitive one because you don't want to get drawn down and have a toxic group kind of suck the life out of you and be a hurtful and negative experience for you. I definitely understand that. But a toxic group won't change if there's no fresh people challenging that and trying to change the environment. So I think even in groups that are a little bit cliquish and a little bit exclusive and toxic, it's important to just continue trying to be that inclusive voice, including positive activities. Try to gather your own group of people that have good intentions and want to be involved, and present them to the FRG leader as, look, all these people are not part of the insider clique, but they also want to help with events and to do activities. So as much as possible, try to challenge a toxic environment by being your own positive force of change. If you feel like the unit activities are not relevant, like I said, speak up, let your voice be heard, tell them what is interesting to you. We had one FRG leader that I think was not a parent, so she didn't understand the needs of moms, especially moms that are basically single during a deployment. And I think she was a military spouse, so she understood military life, but she just was not on the same page as 90% of the families in the unit. And so the things that she was offering were like shopping trips and spa days, which were cool, but not at all useful for a brand new mom with like 3 little ones at home during a deployment. There was no way I could get babysitters and get time and afford to do these things that she was offering. And so at the time, being a young spouse and not really knowing that I was allowed to speak up, I just kind of opted out and didn't do those activities. And looking back, I realize now that if I had talked to other moms and been a little bit more proactive, I could have explained that here's the needs of the new moms in the unit. Here's what we would like to see. Here's how you can help support us during a deployment. And it's not through spa days. That probably would have been really useful information for that FRG leader. So instead of me just checking out and writing her off, I could have been a very helpful voice and a good resource for her. So I encourage you to do that too. And then the number one reason that I think you should join your FRG group is to meet new people. You never know who's going to be in the unit. It doesn't mean that your best friend has to be from your spouse's military unit, but you definitely meet a wide variety of other people. They're already living near you. They're already living on the same base or working on the same base. So you probably have a few things in common already. And it's just a great resource to meet people, to learn about the local area, to find out about resources that are available to you. I have learned so much just from casual conversations with other people, asking them, well, I see that you have kids around the same age as mine. How do you do this with your kids? Or where do you take them for preschool? Or what resources can I use during the summer? And people give me so many great ideas just by asking. But you can't have those conversations if you're not putting yourself in the room. So put yourself in the room, attend the FRG events, and just see what relationships happen and what resources you can learn about. And finally, I just want to remind you that one bad experience with one unit does not mean you should write off family readiness groups for the rest of your spouse's military career. If you have a bad experience, I'm very sorry, but you have to give it another try. Maybe wait until the next unit, or maybe wait until the FRG leader has changed over. It's okay to wait and take a step back, but get back in there and try again, because there's going to be more great opportunities coming along. So thank you for everyone who has joined in our conversation today. If you have more that you want to say about family readiness groups, about great experiences that have worked well in the past, we want to hear about those. If you have had a negative experience that you want to share so that we can all learn from that, that's okay too. So go ahead and leave those experiences in the comments. I will go back and read them even after the live session here. And I am so appreciative of all of you for watching and joining in. And I'd love to hear what your ideas are for future topics. So coming up this summer, we are going to be talking a little bit more about PCS moves and PCS resources. Hey, Ashley, thanks for joining. So we will be talking more about PCS stuff in the future. If you want to suggest other topics, then I am happy to take your ideas and put together some new live videos on those topics. So I'm so glad you were all able to join, and I encourage you to go out and try something with your family readiness group. Give them a chance and see not only what they can do for you, but what you can do for them. Thanks so much. This has been Lizanne, the seasoned spouse, signing off.